This is an experimental recording on a trip down memory lane type of thinking. So using Google street maps, unfortunately, I had hoped that. Okay, so I'll say if I were able to manage this. So this is how you turned into the place where I grew up. This is a green here in which at the top of our street, but effectively I'll go back over the road here. Remember when I was 10, 11 years of age in 1966, very little traffic here. But this has no traffic lights, obviously. You can see the old wall, the same old wall is still there. There were no trees there, probably one or two scuts of trees there. But we would have played football on this green here, five-a-side or whatever. So you just line up, everybody'd line up, and two of the better players, or at least would regard as the better players, they would pick teams. So you'd all be standing out in front, and it would be picked. And essentially, they'd pick in turns. They'd pick their best players, and little fat boy me would be sitting there hoping that somebody would pick me. It's a bit like being at a hiring fair. So I wouldn't be regarded as any good of a footballer. And that's interesting looking back, because I'm not sure that this had anything to do with necessarily your skill. And a number of the guys there, I came from a family who were traditional Irish speaking family, probably very much associated with Rule 7 in Gaelic, which sort of saw soccer as a foreign game, etc. So I wouldn't have had any experience at home for being introduced to football by my father, say soccer, etc. So there's a lot of the other guys around here who are all little superstars playing football with the, with all the local soccer teams like Rangers, etc. Where I was just interested in kicking the ball. So that experience of embarrassment and being not chosen was one I was well used to. But you look at it as part of the overall thing, you just sucked it up and took it in. Often, if there was uneven numbers, at the end there'd be one person left. It could well be me or somebody else, it depends on. But then you'd be thrown sort of, you take him, you take him, or something. You'd be cast aside. But anyway, once the game got underway, sure, look, I enjoyed myself. This was all in eras pre-television, etc. I had no television. And you can see halfway down here, just go back here a little, there's a wee... Again, if I were able to manipulate this somewhat better, I think there, that little, go back here. And then you can see that little pathway across. And that little pathway across between the two little greens, if you walk down that road, you would see the local, one of the two local cinemas, the Adelphi Cinema. So on this second green here, we didn't often play football on this green, although it's not that much smaller, but very seldom would the big games played on here. There was a family who lived in these houses at the end. You'll see those houses. That was a builder's yard at the time. Now, this is the end. This is the guts. It's now shown as the entry into a shopping centre. But that whole area inside that blue gates was a builder's yard, and those two houses belonged to brothers who. The Duffys, who owned that the builder's yard. If I come back up here towards the green, then just around at the centre of that green there, and I say just drive there, in one of those houses, I think probably the one with the, that's what I see here. And probably in that house, lived a woman called Miss Murray, who was my piano teacher. So I went to study the piano there. So I might have been 8, 9, 10 years of age, I think. Myself and another that I was in school called Richie Malloy. We were both sent there, and so this one was what we called a spinster in those days. So my image of a spinster was a real old lady. Now she probably was no more. She mightn't have even been 40 years of age. I have no idea. But at that stage, when you're an 8 or 9 year old, that looks like a really old person. And she used to be very bossy. And looking back in my life, I did my grade 1 and grade 2. I still have those music books. And she used to slap me on the hand with a ruler because I wouldn't be paying attention. I would be looking out that window here. Inside there was a piano. I'd be looking out the window at all the boys playing football and wishing I was outside. I'd absolutely no interest in any of this. And actually, given my then and subsequent and ongoing interest in singing and music and just music in general, this is not consistent with my experience there, but it is my experience of inappropriate teaching, and no judgment on Miss Murray at the time at all, but the nature of teaching was mug and jug stuff. You stood there and you did what you were told. There was no concept of engagement with the soul. And my sense was I got bored doing scales up and down, and it was all Jack and Jill went up the hill kind of music, whereas I wanted to hear the Beatles or whatever was going on at the time. I wanted music that attracted me. So from the point of view of Duco, to draw out the innate talent of the person, it was really unsuccessful. And I possibly gave up after grade 1. Now my parents committed a lot of money of their hard-earned resources to doing this, so this is no way a judgment of anybody, but it is about, for me, how things have changed over the years when you move to what's available nowadays in terms of the excitement and potentials of YouTube, where you can be driven by curiosity, not only as I now am, but as I think all young people are. I was curious about stuff, but it really put me off the potential of. Now, I did learn about quavers and semi-quavers and demi-semi-quavers, etc., but there was no colour in what I was doing, and I just feel sorry about that rather than anything else. So then I do remember Miss Murray used to have a metronome, the click, 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 the traditional style of mechanical metronome she used to put on top of the piano. So I had timing issues even when I was 7 or 8 or 9. So just to give you an idea of the sort of the parameters of my world, yeah, we had bicycles. And I remember there was no traffic lights or anything there, and you just run across the road, in which as it would go. So there's another green here, which you can see a bit of a pathway there, a concrete path. That concrete path wasn't there time, but it was always well trodden. And there's a building in there which might well be and was always there, but I think it might have been an electricity substation. None of those trees, mind you, were there. And then if you follow on this road, then we just go down here. There's another green here, and across inside there, if we just look inside in what that building was, that was Halliday's shoe factory. I think Halliday's were connected with Clark's. So we would have been used to the fact of a factory horn going off in the morning, I think at lunchtime. And many of the people living here worked in places like this. So this green here, there was another crowd of guys from the other part of Pearse Park that would play up on this green. So, it was in gangs of New York, there were gangs in Pearse Park. So I'll just go back along the road again. So as we come in off the domain and just try and put perspective on this, the first row of houses in Pearse Park is where I was brought up. And we just see if we can, I'm not sure how we get to the point. Okay, maybe I have to get onto that blue line and then turn around. So this was the first row of houses. If you go to, as we look on the right hand side, that house there does not belong. So they're houses which are not part of the, let's say, the council estate that I understand. So the first of those houses was occupied by a family called Van Dessels, and Jan Van Dessel was the man who lived there, who was the son of an older man called Michael Van Dessel, who was the choir master in St. Patrick's Cathedral. I think he may have come originally from Belgium. And again, I was fortunate enough to be in his choir. And there's an example now, for example, old Michael Van Dessel, he used to wear these little woolen mitts when he played the organ majestically in the church in St. Patrick's, often after, Mass, after we'd finished the choir, when the Mass was over, he'd be playing away there. And even then I knew it was lovely, but I really enjoyed being in his choir. He was a gentle enough soul, but I suppose I was having crack with me mates, so I was in a choir. So in terms of the musical experience of the piano, I was already enjoying my music, although he used to write out his notes, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, or that sort of stuff. So tonic solfa, is that what you call it? So the next house belonged to, there's two houses here. I think that house belonged to a family called Coffees. I think when I was growing up, the father had died, and I think he may have been a solicitor involved with the law, as certainly one of his sons, I think Paul, went off in that area. And of course, from that house was a chap called Nicky Coffey, who would have been involved in RTE for many years, one of those sort of current affairs program. And this house belonged to a family called Co.Louth. There was a guy called Ronan who'd be a year or two older than me. I think he was a dentist who went off to South Africa, I think, to work. And that first house belonged to the Shaws, of whom there was a couple of guys. There was a guy called Desi Shaw, maybe a year younger than me. His brother Austin, a year or two older than me. Austin was an asthmatic, a small little guy, but probably one of the best footballers that I have ever seen with a ball. He could do anything with a ball, but he was small, and he might have been a year or two older than me, but he would have been impacted on negatively by asthma. So I never ever saw him make it in, say, a real football team. But and I don't know what the realities of that would have been, but he was just incredibly talented with the football. So as you move down the road, you can see these. So I just go down. So this road is, I'll just comment on the condition of the estate. These are council estate. My family moved in here in 1960. Again, I'm not sure how we get to drive down the road. Okay, we get to drive it just by pressing the button. So as we move along down the road, let me see if I can see any houses that I recognise. Again, really what's changed in these houses is the colour. I think that house might have been belonging to the McComishes, and that house there belonged to the Englishes. And then I think this house, the next house here, belonged to the Nordones, and that's relevant. That's Fanula Dullan, who worked with me in the college. That's her, I think that's her family home. But so Nordones were the ice cream people. So her father, Charlie Nordone, made homemade ice cream that would have come from Italy. And we used to, in the summers, go over there to where they had out the back. They had, out the back meant, just as we see there, there's an alleyway between these houses. They're conjoined there, but at the bottom there's an alleyway that you can walk through, probably 3.5 feet of an alleyway. And you walked in out the back there to a place at the back where they had the freezers, and you could buy your ice cream cones and sliders. There was no in those days there was no ice cream vans or anything going around. So the house that I lived in then, if we just move down a little here, so it's coming up to that car where the car is at the right, and so we just stop there and look in. Now, as I look around, I'm looking for samples of the original walls. I don't think there are any here. There might be some further up the road. I can see. I will go up to those in a moment. So that's the house I lived in. I just see if I can move further along. Delicate exercise, this. Again, this is a experimental recording, so I'm wondering. about the granularity of control one can have at this rate. Anyway, so whoops, come back. So this is the house that I was raised in. Okay, I have it now. And it's interesting, this map is showing 36 Pearse Park, but I believe that that relates to the house probably directly across from me, or across from the house, because the house that I lived in, I just wonder, you can see actually, oh, it's not great detail, it was number 16. You can just see it on the left-hand post there. So the house I grew up in was 16 Pearse Park in Dundalk. So what has changed in the layout of the house from when I was that age? Firstly, probably there would have been a driveway going in, although it wouldn't have been anything like that there. The front walls have all changed. Obviously, there was no, this area in here was all grass. There was no fancy trees. Obviously, the place looks quite clean, etc. Now, along the side of the house, if I just go along here, in there, so that area there would have been certainly enough to, would it have been 7 or 8 feet wide? So that's how you went round the side of the house, but it was just grass. There was nothing else. There was a sort of a bit of an old hedge around that whole area. The people who lived next door to us were Duffys. For some reason or other, we didn't get on with them. There were 2 male boys in the house. Arthur was one of them. Maybe he might have been the elder one. He'd be a lot older than me, so my sister's age. There was another fella a couple of years older than me. There was a girl somewhat younger from me, Mary Duffy, who subsequently married a chap called Brennan, who was in my school, but from a different part. He was actually living from down near the school. And they may have subsequently lived there. They may still be living there. I don't know. But we were quite distant from those people. They were, I don't know and this would have obviously been inherited, I presume, from what was going on between the adults, but wouldn't have had very little communication or community with these people, certainly not good stuff. I remember there would have been, like, an old shed out the back, and myself and my brother would have been playing football up against it, and I suppose it was a shed covered with tarmac sort of felt. But I know the man would have been giving out a lot to us, and if the ball went into the garden, we'd have to sneak in to get it, etc. And I remember maybe the father walking across at the back of our garden and my parents giving out about it, etc. But no, absolutely no. Like, when you think of how small this estate is, would have been in terms of community. So we spoke Irish at home. We were regarded as being different. My father was accustomed when we weren't from Dundalk. Not sure. So in some way we were seen as being very different than a lot of other people around. Now, when I say that, there was also a lot of competitiveness, academic competitiveness on the street. The houses I mentioned earlier on, the Nordones, the Englishes, the Shaws on one end, and people up the other end of the street. There would have been a lot of interaction there. Like, as kids, you just went out and played with whoever you played with. But certainly it's interesting to think that next door neighbours wouldn't have a lot to do. So I just wonder if I can move up to show you the bedroom that I slept in. It may, again, the angles of these photographs may not allow for a lot of this. So if I come back to this part of the house and approach it from here, I can. So now the satellite dishes, etc. And in fact, I see breathers on the ceiling. They didn't exist in those days. But that window there, that's the window. So I was in, so this was a 3-bedroomed, semi-detached house. My parents slept in the back of the house, and there was a separate toilet and a bathroom there. And then myself and my brother slept in the room, the smaller of this room in the front, and 4 sisters would have slept in the other room where there were 2 double beds. So the room we were in was, to say, the small bedroom up the front. Now it's interesting in my teens when I'd be trying to sneak in and out of the house, etc. This is interesting that I remember coming back in late one night, and how I got into the house was so against this room here, there would have been a double bed um, up against that window and in parallel with it. And then down in this part of the room, there would have been, just where that tree is there, just to the left of the window, there would have been another double bed in there. So that was where the four beds. But this, now the windows were old cast iron windows. I just wonder if there's anything like that left in the street. But I remember the mark of agility. So climbing up on the little wall down here, there was a little wall here, as you can see at the bottom there, just where that tree is. No trees there. And then swinging off this top cantilevered concrete section, pulling myself up onto this, walking over to the side where that cable is, pulling open that window on the side, which had to, as you can see the way in which it opens back out, so that from the side of this cantilevered structure here, I would have been hanging out here and leaning across into it and dragging myself up into the window and crawling into the bedroom and landing in on top of my two sisters, the two younger of the four sisters, and them then being, you know, screaming or whatever, and me telling them to shut up or whatever. So anyway, those were the magical days. But I was capable of doing something like that at that stage. And the other thing is, there were no gates. You see that gate. So in that common section there, you can see an alleyway, which is a common alleyway between the two houses. And you walked around the back, and you know, there was coal sheds and all this, and long back gardens for the time. Long back gardens. Again, it comes dates from the time people probably, well, we didn't grow, tried to grow some things at the bottom, but there was grass at the bottom. But it is interesting that the two houses at the bottom floor are separated by that alleyway. So acoustically, compared to other modern or later semi-detached houses, you couldn't hear the noise from one house into another. So that was the. I tell you what I think about those houses. All of the houses were solidly built houses. The walls downstairs and upstairs were all block built. There was no studded partitions, etc. So I think even you can see these houses were built in probably 1956. I think we might have moved in there in 1960 when I was 4 years of age, and we lived there until my parents sold a house in 1977 when I was 21. I just graduated from university and gone working in Drogheda. So I was probably working in Cement Limited in Drogheda for a couple of months when my parents sold the house and moved to Dublin, where they were originally from. My father went working in Dublin. So the house beside us, yeah.
The alley, where's the alley?
So there's an alleyway between every house. I suppose let's just see if I can. So the house beside us belonged to a family called Monaghan's. Raymond Monaghan, I think was the man's name. And I suppose Bridget, who would be close to me in age, and Joe, who'd be the same age as me. Joe, who's married to one of the McMahons that lives down on the Point Road now. Not lovely man now, but again, we would have had a lot to do with them. Elder sisters Anne, I think, might have been a friend of my sister Moore. I think she was a teacher. And Carmel, who was probably closer in age to my brother Colin, she also was a teacher. Their mother suffered, I think, from polio, I think it was. And she always seemed to have been an invalid as we were growing up. So the father was a long-suffering man. He worked in PJ Carroll's. But you can see the alleyway. But again, we wouldn't have. I remember being in their house when we were young. I said we probably weren't as against a lot of people in the street. Seem to, I think, went into each other's houses a lot. We wouldn't really have been in each other's house. There were 6 children in our house, so that might be a bit hard to interpret there. Because that's a full alleyway with a little pillar just in between them. But you could walk in between them, so we could keep our bicycles and everything in there. You know. So as we move along the road then, I suppose across the road there was the people who lived across there. I think that family were called Agnews. There was John Agnew, I think he had a sister called Mary, and there was a man who used to lodge there, Gabe Berkery, who my elder sister Kiva taught Irish, gave him Irish grinds, and he became the district court clerk. He was from outside of Dundalk, but I had many dealings with Gabe Berkery and family law issues over years subsequent then, and he was a very honourable public servant. That's what I'd say about him. I don't mean in any way favourable or otherwise, but always very civil to me in any dealings I had with him. So the houses then beside them, that house there, I think belonged, the house directing from us, belonged to the Mccarthys. Mr. McCarthy being a retired army man, he gave me once, I built a little golf course out in the back garden. Imagine I built a golf course in the back garden. So I put a little, I mowed the lawn with one of those old push mowers, real mechanical job, which would skid if the grass was wet. But I cut it down, and then I used tins of Nescafe coffee, small tins to be about the size of a small golf hole, but 3 inches deep. And I would dig out 100 grand and put the. No, we didn't drink coffee. Don't know where I had to hooch around to get the tins of coffee. But he gave me a wooden sticked golf thing. Now I think it was a chipper, you might call it, but that's all I could use as a putter. And I put about 3 holes in the garden that I could work with. So there was John McCarthy, who would have met over suddenly. I remember John was. I gave him some advice about. He was learning to swim in the Ora swimming pool in the Dundalk maybe 10 years ago. John would be a year older than me, and there was another guy, Martin, who was a doctor who went to the States, and Teresa, so much younger than me, she was the head or the principal in the local friary school. I would have met her later over the years. And then beside that were the Peppers. So there was Martin, your tea's ready, Martin and Noel Pepper. I think Noel might have been a plumber in the council, etc. And beside them, in this house here, I think there was a Protestant couple who didn't have any kids. Can't remember their name, but they were all very kept to themselves, etc. But we would have known they were Protestants, and we sort of bypassed them or whatever. But we never really spoke to them because they were Protestants, even though it seemed to be a really nice couple. But you must remember that I was a young guy, 6 kids in a family. You're running around doing your own thing. I didn't think about these big issues in the world at all. There was a family there in this house. That house has been extended. You can see what people have done to the house, because that particular house, you can see a lot has been added on to side. That house belonged to the McStravics. Peter McStravick was, I think, the father, and also the son, who would be somewhat younger than me, be called Peter, but he also was a customs man. They moved in sometime later than us. The next house then belonged to, I think that house there, the one on the right hand side, belonged to Kieran's, of Lucy Kieran, who died unfortunately a number of years ago. So Lucy might have been Lucia, somebody, Murray, I think she might have been her married name, Lucia Murray. She was a counsellor. Lucy would have been in the same age group as one of my sisters, maybe more. And then the next house belonged to people Paul McGowan's, in which Jane McGowan was a co-ishak of a school-going friend of my sister's as well. And then we move up the road. Some of these people on either side. Paddy McGivern would have grown up in one of these houses here, possibly. Not sure what house. You tend to get lost a little bit. One of those houses there, maybe that house, maybe the sort of magnolia-shaped house there. Now, actually, we probably get to see some of the old walls. I mentioned it. So that was, if we look here now, we'll see the shape of the. So there's an example of the original walls, and actually quite beautiful. Aren't they gorgeous red brick walls? The original walls. That's right. It's quite frustrating actually, trying to manipulate. Just go back down here a little, stop, and then turn around and see if we can see the wall. So see the old red brick wall with concrete. Actually, again, I'm not sure if there were if they were cappings on them or just set in concrete, I'm not sure. But that was the height of the wall. So this is relevant insofar as when I would come home from school, this wall would be all the way down, and it's at a height of maybe 2 foot 6 or something. But we would run along these walls, and you jump down at the side, then back up, and then um, and I have in my mind my mother saying something to me about maybe it's around my time my leaving cert, and I don't know whether she said it to me or I've fabricated this in my mind, but my sense of running down the walls after my leaving cert from not from the other end down towards my house, singing "My Way" by Frank Sinatra, and my mother having some conversation with me subsequent in life about my rebelliousness. True, I'm going to do it my way. Uh, so I'm still doing it my way and just making it up as I go along. Um, so up at the top there was somebody. Let's see who. Well, there is a house here belonging to. Oh no, let's see if I can find. So, okay, if we go from. Right. So what I just see, I think. Oh dear. I think one of these houses belongs to. I think probably that house there, number 4. I'm wondering if it's number 4 number belonged to the Harmons. So Shamie Harmon, who used to work in Murphy's Coach Builders, and done lovely guy. Jimmy, I think, also suffered. I think he might have had polio, so he was he was sort of crippled in a way, or very leg movement all his life. But lovely guy, and a very nice man. So Jamie would be just somewhat older than me, but his sister Maureen would have been a friend of my sister's. Maureen, and when I was in Dundalk, when I was living there a number of years ago. I used to go down and maybe give her a hand with helping her sort out her computer problems and stuff. But again, a lovely person. And again, so Maureen wasn't married, and she lived there. Neither was Shamie. They lived there, and Una. So Una's a sister who would be a couple of years older than me. Who I remember I used to fantasize about when she'd walk down the street. Reminds me of it as she goes to Sunday Mass. But a lovely smile that Una had, I remember. The two top houses then, that these are, so this is, so that's why this street was the first street. That house is number 1 Pearse Park and used to belong to the Nultys. Peter Nulty would be somewhat older, again, my brother Colum's age, a couple of years older than me, and they lived up in Glenwood subsequently. Which is the next estate to where I was living in on the Dublin Road, and their daughter Laura, when she was young, used to hang around with Niall and Tig. They were very young, and then beside there were the Cuthberts. So the Cuthberts, there was a number of boys in the Cuthberts. There was Neville. I remember Neville being always with the moustache. Now these guys were a number of years older than me. There was Eric, who'd be just slightly younger than me. There was Neville. I can't just remember. There was the other guys' names, but the Cuthberts all seem to be real nature people. Now there is another guy. I used to meet him later on. I can't remember his name, but they were heavily into motorbikes and things like that, and into nature. So I mean, the Cuthberts used to take me up across the railway line is in behind those trees. On the other side of that railway line, there used to be a place called the Queen's Quarry. There was all wild countryside up there before they built. And I remember they used to take me up with kids. We'd go up there, and I remember them showing me how to get birds' eggs out of nests, and they'd stick a needle, a pinhole, 2 pinholes into the egg, and blow the whatever contents of the egg out, so they have empty eggshells. And I remember my father got some little pen knives. So the Harp Lager Brewery, which had started up there was these little pen knives, flat pen knives, and to have a pen knife, that was a really big thing, and we used to be able to cut wood and things in it. So that's and you can see again the old wall there. So, where I spent my youth, and to tell you the truth, I was sad to leave it all behind me, where I learned about life. No, didn't find any wives there. But that was a town I loved so well. So that was what my experiences of Pearse Park. And the wonderful thing, imagine in 2020 you can use the Google Street View to look through that. So just in context of the town then, I'm zooming out now. So I say just go back into there where Pearse Park is, that's where that is public, right? Pearse Park, you can see that. So if you zoom back out again, you can see how close all of this was to the St. Paris. So it's all within 5 minutes of everything else, right? And even if you look to the top right there of St. Mary's College grounds, uh, the school I went to was the Christian Brothers School, which was on. Well, it's funny. It doesn't. It's not Colosh de Reese is what it's shown there, in there. But so it was only a 10-minute walk to school. So we used to actually walk to school in the morning, walk back at lunchtime. So we weren't a transported generation. Did a lot of walking and exploration over and back on the way to school. So that's a few recollections. I'm making these recollections on Monday the 27th of April